right, welcome everybody. I'm Diane Conklin. I'm excited. I can't even tell you how excited and honored I am to be doing this particular issue of the Queer Prophets podcast. I am honored to have my friend, my business associate, colleague, so many words. I'm so excited to have Gabrielle Claiborne with us today, and I have no idea where this is going to go. We can do so many things, and Gabrielle brings so much to the table that I can't even tell you how excited I am to be doing this particular interview. So Gabrielle, tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And Diane, thank you so much for having me and for creating a space for this courageous and candid conversation.
Absolutely.
My name is Gabrielle Claiborne, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a parent. I am a sibling. I am a child, and I am a business owner. And 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, I co-founded Transformation Journeys Worldwide, which is an inclusion training and consulting firm with a transgender focus. So we help a myriad of organizations nationally and internationally on their journey of creating fully trans inclusive cultures, whatever that culture may be. A lot of our markets are corporate America, the healthcare space, educational institutions, spiritual communities, nonprofits. So we show up in a myriad of places, acknowledging that people are at different places on their journey of understanding the trans experience. And so we meet them where they are and help them develop the strategies to move this initiative forward.
It's interesting that you just said that, meet people where they are, because I think that's one of the reasons that I've been so drawn to you, is that you do that's exactly who you are. Like, you meet people where they are. Right. And I think that's something that I don't know. I think that's unique. I think most people in the world, and I know I'm generalizing here, right? But I think we want people to be where we are, right? We want people to be here so that we can help them move forward, right? But I think the fact that and that was just so eloquent, right? We meet people where they are and take them from where they are and where they're ready to be to the next place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I have learned in my own personal journey is that, when you're helping someone see something, a different perspective, different from their own personal lens, right? You have to acknowledge where they are and help them navigate, give them permission to kind of step into a space that may be a little uncomfortable, it may be a little unknown, and to step into that space knowing with the intention and in the spirit of, learning. And learning may involve making mistakes along the way, right? And not being offended when somebody makes a mistake, and create an educational opportunity in a non-threatening way for them to learn, right? Yeah. And so in my personal experience, that's the approach that I've taken, is giving people permission to be vulnerable and transparent. I've often said, you got to be comfortable getting uncomfortable. So that's kind of my MO, if you will.
And it's so refreshing for me because, it's that space sometimes of, you want to help, and and I talked about, the three pillars for us for queer prophets is inclusion, community, and growth. And even for me, sometimes in that, I'm afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing, or that I'm going to use the wrong word, or, and that someone's going to be offended. Right. And I think, you know me well enough to know I would never I'm not ever going to do that intentionally. Right, but I think sometimes in people's quest, like we lash out at people, right? That's not the right term, but how dare you? And instead of saying, gosh, she truly doesn't know. And I think that's one of the things that I respect most about you is being able to have that conversation. And I know that if I have a question, like I could totally reach out to you and say, hey, I'm about to do this. Is this the right word, or is this the right way to approach this? Right. Especially if it relates to the trans community. And I just shared with you, I just talked to Diane Haynes, and it's the same thing, right? It's that but I think sometimes because we do lash out and because we live in that world of we're supposed to know. I mean, after all, I'm a member of the queer community. Don't I know everything about gay men, lesbians, bisexual people, transgender people, people who are, I don't, right? I mean, I know my journey, and I think having the ability to have that openness is so critically important.
Yeah, I think that approach, or that reality of this divided, this divisive culture and this divisive dynamic world that we're living in now is a result of people taking things personally as it relates to their own personal experience, and not seeing you as an extension and connection to me, right? And the only way that you and I are going to, respect and include and be inclusive toward one another, even though we may disagree on certain things, it's like we've got to be able to get courageous and have those difficult conversations and not take things personally.
Yeah. I think that's head on. So,
and just so you know, this is what we do in our business. I mean, a lot of our clients approach us and they say, Gabrielle, we want to do the right thing, but we really don't know how to start, right? And I mean, in the conversations, kind of in discovery conversations that we have with our clients in preparation for our engagements, they'll make a mistake here and there. And, we take an opportunity to say, we'd like to share with you something and kind of give them some educational information. And it gives them permission to say, okay, we can show up vulnerably. It's okay to make a mistake in the spirit of learning. So a lot of our clients are at that space of not knowing where to start. And so we kind of help them in this conversation to unfold and unwrap what this looks like for them.
Yeah. And you do that inside of businesses, which I think is amazing and so different from, not many years ago, right? Where this was like, nobody would have thought about having these conversations inside of their work or business environment.
I never thought of doing it, right? A few years ago. I mean, right. I've evolved vocationally, so yeah, totally.
Right. So let's talk about, I want to get to what you guys are doing a little bit more, but I want you to share, if you're okay with it, your story of kind of, what you were doing before your transition, and then kind of how you got to the things that you're doing now. Because for me, as I told you before we came on, I was mesmerized, 2 years ago when I heard you talk about your story and the business and all of the things that you did in your transition and kind of led you to what you're doing now.
Sure. So first of all, I knew at a very young age that something was different about me. Okay. And I was raised in a very conservative environment. I'm a Pentecostal preacher's kid. So, I did, growing up, because I didn't have the language to articulate or understand what was going on inside of me. I grew up and I did everything that culture says that a white heterosexual male does, right? You get married. First of all, you get a good education, you get married, you have kids, you have a very successful career, you get plugged into your spiritual community if that's your thing. And that's exactly what I did. So I masked what was going on in the background when I didn't have the words to understand and articulate this to me or anyone else. I masked these desires by overcompensating it in the way that culture expected me to show up. So there were a number of invitations throughout my life that were encouraging me and inviting me to say, Gabrielle, what are you going to do with who you were created to be? And it wasn't until 2010 where I had a life-changing experience where I met myself for the very first time. I found on the internet, thank God for the internet, I found on the internet a local dressing service, and I made an appointment with this lady here in Atlanta, and I met with her, and she dressed me up completely to match how I felt, who I was on the inside. And when she was doing this makeover in her dressing salon, she dressed me head to toe with the jewelry, with the with the shoes, with the wig, with the makeup, with the dress. And then she did the big reveal, and I saw myself in the mirror for the first time, and I thought, oh my God, that's me. So I was meeting myself at the age of 49 for the very first time. So that set me on this course of finding who I really was. And this involved turning every aspect of my life upside down, with my relationship with my family, both my family of origin and my immediate family, my 3 kids and my spouse. It involved coming out in my workplace. It involved coming out in my spiritual community. It involved coming out to my friends. So when we talk about the coming out experience for the trans, from the perspective of the trans experience, and in many ways it's similar to the coming out experience for the LGBTQ community. But for trans people who come out later in life, you're actually transitioning from a person that they knew to in many aspects, a new person completely, right? So it required there to be difficult conversations in every aspect of those dynamics, workplace, family relationships, spiritual community, everything. And it's been a journey. I'm 10 years into this journey so far, and we're still having difficult conversations across all of those different aspects of the transitioning process. But one of the significant aspects was my vocational challenges. I'd been an entrepreneur for much of my life. I had some time in the corporate space, but predominantly spent my time as an entrepreneur. And coming out as a trans woman in the construction industry for 30 plus years, there's no way that I was going to show up in my good old boy industry, especially being their boss, in a dress. I mean, that just was not going to fly,
So
totally. I mean, gender equity in the construction industry is difficult in and of itself.
Right.
So to throw this additional layer of gender equity was a little too much for that time. But so what I stepped back, and I had to rebrand myself, and I started a few businesses and built those businesses up and became relatively successful. But all along, as I was navigating this vocational journey, I was also navigating my personal journey as a human being, wanting to show up, authentically and do what is mine to do in this world all the time. So after a number of years in those businesses, I recognized that there was yet another vocational iteration for me to consider. And that's when I ended up selling those businesses to my trans employee, by the way. So I kept it in the community, which I was very glad to be able to do. And started, transformation journeys 5 years ago. And I'm living my work. And for 30 years when I was in the construction industry, I love what I do. I love what I did. And I was very good at it, very successful at it. But now the space that I'm currently in, I not only love what I do, but I do what I love. And when I wake up every morning, it's not like going to work. I mean, I feel like I am on a new journey every day with new opportunities unfolding. And what I've learned, even in my own personal journey, is that, living authentically is not just reaching a destination. It's more about the journey than the destination. So new things are continuing to unfold in my life vocationally, and, continuing showing up in different ways, in new ways, has become kind of, my message to the world is that, authenticity never stops. Our authenticity continues and is ever unfolding.
Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking, like I've seen just a difference in, as cliche as this sounds, like just in your spirit, right? Just since I've known you, there's like, you're always smiling. You always have this glow about you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's just different now, I think, than when I very first met you. Part of it's getting to know you, but I think there's just this real sense of peace and being in purpose and having found that. And I think it shows in everything that you do. So
yeah, I believe that the more you settle into your truth as a person, the more you embrace all aspects of your authenticity. I think the more, I know from my own personal experience, the more that I get in touch with who I was intended to be, right? So, and that allows me to live inside out. And a lot of people don't know, what living inside out means, but it's almost like what you see on the outside, the energy that I portray on the outside to the world is all of the internal and the work that I've had to do on me internally, right? To get comfortable, to be content, to be pleased and to be happy and to love myself to the degree that I can show up authentically in the world.
I love that. Living from the inside out.
Yes.
You're right. I think most people don't understand what that means. So that was a great definition of that. So Gabrielle, let's back up for a minute, because one of the things that you just said that struck me was in the trans experience, you have to continue to come out because in many ways you are a different person.
Right.
And it's interesting because my thing has always been, I'm the same person I was yesterday. Just because I came out to you, now that I love differently, or I'm attracted to the same sex,
right.
But I'm the same person, right? And you just said the opposite in the trans experience. So talk a little bit more about that piece, because that's interesting to me. I mean, I get it on some level, and it's so different from my coming out experience.
Well, I want to start by qualifying. We say this in our trainings: when you've heard one trans person's story, you've heard one trans person's story. They're going to all be different. And what I'll share with you is my own personal story, but it just because I share these aspects from my personal experience doesn't mean that it's that way for every trans experience. Okay, so that's the first thing that I would say. But I mean, my transition has invited and required many different things to unfold, in my life. For example, I'll take my relationships with my parents and my spouse, my spouse and my children. It's like, my parents no longer have a son.
Right.
They have a daughter. And it's like, parents immediately go to the place of when let me back up. So when you say, when I share, this has been my personal experience, what a lot of people have to understand that it's not just my journey that this has, that I'm on, it's everyone else's journey that's a part of my life, right? So it's a journey for my parents, my sister, my spouse, my kids, those I work with, my friends, my spiritual community, every aspect that we talked about earlier. So it's just as much as part of their journey as it is mine. So my parents are now having to navigate, oh my God, do we have a daughter or is this still our son? And grappling with that, right? And a lot of parents go to this place of, what did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong to create this situation, right? And of course, no, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that, a lot of us didn't have the language to explain this to you at a very young age, right? So that's one thing that parents go through. And then, in my case, my parents were very conservative, very, in a traditional Christian environment, which I was raised in. And so they look at this from that perspective and saying, this is wrong. This is going against everything God said is right and true. And so that's another layer of processing that they have to do. From the perspective of my kids, I mean, think about it. For 20 plus years, my kids had a dad, right? I mean, I was very close to my kids. I did everything with my kids. I traveled all over the country with my son when he was playing ice hockey. I carried my daughters to ballet for 15 years. So when I came out, I transitioned. It's like, okay, so what do we do with this now? You know, I remember there was a season with my oldest daughter that I didn't have any communication with her for 2 years because she was processing what this was like for her. And it wasn't until I gave her space and loved her from a distance and supported her from a distance that she had the courage to, okay, say, what does this look like for us moving forward? I mean, just this past Father's Day, my youngest daughter reached out to me and said, the day before, she said, you know, my kids call me DA. She said, Da, I don't really know what to do about tomorrow, but I want to be respectful to you. At the same time, acknowledge, you know, the meaning that you have in my life and the relationship that we have as, you know, as me as her parent and she is my daughter. And, you know, I immediately thought, oh my God, this is something that people who don't have a gender transition never have to contemplate, right? So we had a conversation and we ended up saying, you know, why don't we just call Father's Day Parents' Day? And that's kind of what we've done. So it's this transition, a gender transition, especially in the intersections that I bring to this experience, require a lot of difficult conversations that don't normally get on people's radar, right? So, I mean, 2 years ago, my oldest daughter got married, and unfortunately, I wasn't invited to the wedding because, you know, me showing up as a woman would have taken all the, you know, attention away from the intention of the event, right? So it's things like that that you have to navigate when someone goes through something like this. And that's why I say it's been an ongoing journey. And it's not, you know, it's having difficult conversations every day. I mean, my oldest daughter is pregnant. She's going to have her first child. We're now going to have a new family member that has never known me other than Gabrielle. So that's another layer, another aspect of our journey that we're navigating as a family, as a parent and a daughter, that's new, right?
Wow. Yeah, it's a whole different, right? Like perspective when you talk about it. I mean, my heart just sank when you said, you know, with such understanding and love in your heart, like I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding. My heart just sank. And then you were like, because, and you know, we don't have to get into that, but you have just this way of like bringing it out. While that had to have been hard. While you understand it, it still had to be like just crushing. This is your daughter's wedding.
Well, you're talking to me 2 years after grieving.
Right. Right.
There's a lot of grieving that I've had to go through around those things, right? So
yeah. Wow. So this is all just so, again, you know, some of it's similar, right? I mean, the whole, like, my parents did the same thing. God didn't make you this way. And what did we do wrong? And, you know, that whole conservative thing. But yet there's so many more layers that, again, I've never thought about until we were having this conversation, because I guess, you know, because I didn't have to, because I had my own journey. And
right.
You know, when I think about, you know, there's so much in the news now about, you know, just stupid things and laws and bathrooms and, you know, and the whole athletic thing now with, you know, trans children who are competing and where do they compete with? And,
right.
And unfortunately, you know, all the stupid killings that are happening for what I can't imagine is anything but a dumb reasons. But, you know, there's so much more, I think, awareness. And, you know, whether you look at a Renee Richards, who was kind of my first recollection of a trans person, and you know, most recently with Caitlin, you know, the thing that I think about is I know what my journey and my challenges have been. I can't imagine what it must have been to feel like you're in the wrong body.
Right.
I mean, my brain can't even, I think that's where the, you know, so much judgment and people making, you know, assumptions and lashing out about things. It's like, do you have any compassion for what this must be like to go through?
Right. Yeah. And, you know, for many people, Diane, they do feel like they're in the wrong body. And that is, as you learned from Diane in your earlier interview, gender dysphoria, right? But not all trans people experience gender dysphoria, you know? Not all trans people feel like they're in the wrong body. I mean, I'm personally one of those. I didn't feel like I was in the wrong body. I just feel like I didn't feel like my external body matched who I knew myself to be. So it wasn't that I was so distressed with my external gender expression or anatomy. But it did require an alignment. So many trans people go through this alignment process called transitioning, right? There's three aspects of the transitioning process. And one of those aspects is medical or physical transition. So many trans people go through those physical transitions pending resources and, you know, insurance coverage and that kind of thing, to align their bodies, right? But not everybody feels distressed with being in the wrong body.
Thank you for that clarification. So what are the other two areas of transition?
So there's social transitions, which is usually the first aspect of transitioning. This involves, you know, someone coming out, showing up out in the world with their gender expression they're expressing who they know themselves on the outside, like, you know, their hairstyles, the clothes they wear, their mannerisms, their vocal inflection, all these things are gender expressions. That's part of a social transition. Someone may change their name, not legally, but socially. It's going to require a new wardrobe, right? It may require using different pronouns, right? And it's going to require using different restrooms. So these are aspects of social transitions. Then you go to legal transitions. This is a legal name change, a gender marker change, and not all trans people may or can pursue all those different aspects because there's financial requirements to get these things done. And there's a lot of those, excuse me, there are a lot of barriers for the trans community and being able to navigate those transitions. And especially when you get to the physical and medical transitions, when you're talking about the multiple gender affirming surgeries that a trans person can pursue, you know, these are big ticket items. And I'll take a moment just to dispel a quick myth. You know, you may hear someone say, have you had the surgery? And by the way, that's a very inappropriate question. But there's not just one surgery. There are multiple gender affirming surgeries that a person may elect to pursue. So those are the three aspects of transitioning: social, legal, and medical.
Great, thank you for that. So this is all, as I told you, this is all fascinating to me because my understanding is like, you know, this much. But I love the fact
and you're getting here.
Right, I know, exactly. And I love it because it is, and again, the fact that there's a space that you know, with so many of them, not that I have a lot of trans friends, but all of the trans friends that I do have provide that space for this kind of conversation and this kind of interaction and learning in what I call a safe place or a soft place, right? There's always this soft place to go where you can get the answer so I'm not an idiot when I'm in public. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I don't say the wrong things, you know, out of the best place from our hearts, right? And I think there needs to be, and I love the fact that you're doing this in companies and with our straight counterparts and all that. And I think there needs to be some more of this, which hopefully I can help with, you know, inside of our community, because I think some of those things that you just talked about, people are clueless about inside of our community. And again, not that we expect everybody to know everything, but to have some, I think it makes us all more compassionate, more empathetic, more unified, you know, when we have that piece.
Yeah, I spent a couple of years in the earlier iteration of transformation journeys worldwide, actually traveling nationwide, speaking at different pride organizations, because which is, you know, within our community, because they were like, you know, we want to include trans and queer and non-binary folks in the conversation, but we really don't even know what that means, right? I mean, especially when they're using the terms incorrectly, you know, and they're really not knowing how to provide space for those voices to be seen and those people and voices to be seen and heard. So I did a lot of work in this space, and I can tell you that's been some of the most rewarding work that I've ever done, because, you know, there's something about a community, internal community engagement, because they have their own personal perspective of what marginalization is from their personal experience, right? So they're really eager and wanting to learn and do the right thing, and not only learn to be respectful, but let's carry it to the next level. We want to advocate for you, you know? We want to stand in the gap for you when you're not in the conversation. So that's some of the greatest work that I've done.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the work and the way you've transitioned through this, because, you know, one of the things that so many of us, you know, experience at some point in time is some sort of discrimination or being uncomfortable about, you know, some of these things. So talk about, have you had any of that inside of what you're doing, or have you not experienced that? Or?
Well, we've showed up in many different environments. Okay, probably as far as the East is from the West has been the reality of the dynamic of the culture. Okay, but I can tell you that those organizations who are reaching out to us are, again, those organizations who recognize gaps, recognize blind spots in themselves, and they want to do the right thing, and they want to have support as they navigate this on what this means for them. So, you know, for the most part, the pushback that we've received from our clients is helping them see what they don't know that they don't know, and recognizing the value in the services that we bring to them. So, you know, pushback, not so much, other than what I just said. So,
how about when you get to the place where you're doing, you know, presentations, or, you know, do you have people in the businesses and in the, you know, sitting in your seminars and in your talks and those kinds of things that are?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I'm standing up there in front of the audience, you know, you can scan the crowd and you can tell, okay, this person's really struggling with this conversation, and this person is like, give me more. And again, it's all over the spectrum, right? But again, you know, meeting people where they are, and it may not happen, the breakthrough may not happen in the first touch. It may be the 7th or 8th touch, right? And the important thing is to stay visible, you know, stay present with them. And again, allow them that safe space, like you said, to unpack their own unconscious cultural assumptions that they have about gender. And we have, because of our domestication that we've experienced in this culture that we've been raised in, we have unconscious cultural assumptions that a lot of times block our openness, our willingness to say, okay, even though this is different from my own personal experience, I can look at this as a unique expression, another unique expression of the human experience. So it's staying present with them, it's staying consistent, and continuing to support them along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you just said that, because I think so many times what happens is my way is the right way, because it's what I know, right? It's what I'm comfortable with. It's what I've always known. And so we get into this thing, and I think, as great as social media is, I think social media perpetuates this a little bit, because we're not in front of each other. We're not having that communication, right? It's easy to throw stones when you're not face to face. And so we get this whole, like, people fighting for, you know, this is wrong and this is wrong. And I'm like, it's wrong for you.
Right.
It doesn't make it wrong.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You know? And so I think, you know, I think it's just that interesting communication. I was saying to somebody the other day, one of my best friends, and her husband are pretty conservative. He more so than her, and we differ a lot. And yet, the bottom line is, if I needed something right now, I could pick up the phone and he would be here. You know, he loves me for me, and you know, while he doesn't understand, and quite frankly, I'm not sure I do, but I don't have to. right? I know that it is what it is, and my experience is different, and I don't have to understand. I don't understand mine. So for me to think I'm going to understand everything that you've gone through is not possible. But that doesn't mean that I can't love and accept you or another trans person or a person of color or whatever. It's just different.
Absolutely. I think, Diane, in our culture, there's a dynamic that is being perpetuated that is probably the biggest reason that we're experiencing the division that we're experiencing in our culture, and that is this reality, or this perception of us and them. You know, you got to be on our side or the other side, and there's not a coming together, sitting down across the table and saying, okay, I want to listen and I want to hear you, and I'm not going to try to fix the situation or offer solutions to you. I just want to sit here and listen and allow you to be seen and heard. And I think until we're able to have to create those vulnerable spaces and have those courageous conversations, that we're going to start allowing ourselves to let our own personal walls and lens and perspective and biases down, lay them down, and recognize that there's more than just us. There's them too. And it doesn't have to be an us and them. It could be a unified us, right?
Yeah, I love that. So I just did actually on Facebook yesterday, somebody put a post, it was an entrepreneurial thing, and said, you know, entrepreneurs who have problems with people making offers should go get a job. And I said, you know, the problem is bigger than that. It's why do we have to judge each other for anything, right? It's that piece. So I think you're the perfect person to ask this based on what you just said, right? So how do we start those conversations and creating those environments, not at the world at large, because that's a big picture, right? How do we start that inside of our own, inside of the LGBTQ community? How do we start that inside of you know, where we are as a community of queer people?
I think what we have to do is where my favorite author and speaker, what she says, and that is we've got to be willing to be vulnerable and transparent with each other. And that's Brene Brown. That's Brene Brown. I mean, I've learned so much hearing her and reading her books about the power of vulnerability, because, you know, I feel like, and what I've learned from her, you know, the more we're vulnerable, and I'm not saying just to expose everything to everybody, but I am suggesting that when we're having these courageous conversations, that you establish some parameters, some rules, some ground rules, some house rules of, you know, being respectful. But to have those courageous conversations, vulnerable conversations where you're sitting across the table from one another. And because the thing is, Diane, I believe the division exists between communities, between marginalized experiences, between, you know, different life experiences, because people don't understand the other experience and they see their experience as the way. And until you're willing to be vulnerable with your own experience and say, I want to see your experience as your own, and not to judge it and not to condemn it and not to compare it to even my own, right? I want to understand it, because only then, Diane, are we going to create an empathy connection. And until we're connecting at a heart level, are we going to be able to lay down those biases that we have and connect with a person's, you know, who they really are as a human being. You know, I was interviewed a couple years ago, right when President Trump was elected to office, and, you know, he immediately started, implicating, you know, many of my community, right, in the legislative decisions that he was making. And somebody said, so Gabrielle, if you could say one thing to Donald Trump, what would it be? And I said, I would say, sit down across the table from me and get to know me as a human being. You know, we are human beings at the end of the day. My experience may be different from yours, but it doesn't make me any less human than you, nor does it deny me anything that you deserve, being the human being that you are. And until we're able to do that, I think we're going to continue perpetuating this us and them, this perspective.
Yeah, that was powerful. That was, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So you just
like we're doing here, right?
Right, right. So you just said something that I think you put in a way I've never quite heard before. You said the empathetic connection.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone use it in that way before.
Well, here's the thing, Diane, until I couldn't even get connected with who I was until I was willing and ready to have an empathy connection with me. I mean, I had to unpack all of that, right? And we love others. We accept others to the degree that we love and accept ourselves. So starting with ourselves, with that empathy, that acknowledgement of empathy, really determines the degree that we're able to be empathetic with other people. But until we're there, you know, we're not able to lay down our own marginalizations, our own perspectives, and say, yes, I see you for who you are, and I embrace you as another aspect of the human experience.
Wow. You'll why this just popped into my head, but it did. So I'm going to share this with you. So one of the things, I have a business associate who years ago looked at me and said, Diane, you're like a Mack truck full of marshmallows. And I've laughed about it ever since. And I actually have a graphic of a Mack truck that's got marshmallows all around it. And
right.
As I'm just listening to you speak, I'm thinking to myself, she's a marshmallow with a Mack truck inside. Because you start off with this soft, but then there's this piece of you that's like, you know, and you're never hard about it, but I see that Mack truck coming out of the marshmallows, right?
Yes.
I just had that image of both of us. So I just felt the need to share that with you.
That is the power of authenticity.
Yeah. And,
right?
And part of it is just, right, the difference in, you know, personalities, upbringing, whatever, right? You just have that softer approach, whereas I have that, you know, I'm just kind of a little more direct, and I get excited, and it's
yes.
But
we need all that, Diane.
Right, exactly, right. God forbid that we all be the same, but gosh, this has been so amazing, and I seriously, I could do this for hours, but
yes.
I know you have things to do, and people aren't going to listen for hours all at once, so we'll break it up. But so let me ask you just a couple of other questions.
Sure.
So what's the best business advice that either you've ever received or that you would like to give to the queer community?
So the best business advice is that, and this is, I was asked to write last year for a pre-Pride, kind of an introduction to the Pride celebration last year. You know, what would you tell your pre-transition self? Okay. And I really had to sit down and think about that. And this is what I came up with. And that is that the perceived risk and the pain that you may experience pales in comparison to not living in your integrity and living an authentic life and to be who you were created to be. And for me, I had to wrestle with this question for half of my life. Because as I moved through my life, I built all of these expectations of other people of how I show up. And as I built those, through my transition, those things unraveled to a degree. And I had to navigate back through those things. But what I realized on the other side of that was that, like I said, those perceived risks and the pain that I might have experienced pales in comparison of being who I was meant to be authentically from the very beginning. So that's the best business, that's the best recommendation and advice that I could give to someone who may find themselves in the middle of making some very difficult decisions of where they are in their own personal journey, you know, with their family, with their vocation, wherever, whatever that perceived risk or that pain you may experience. Yes, there are risk and pain that you experience, but relatively speaking, to live in an authentic life, they pale in comparison.
Wow. That brought some out. Thank you very much. That was great. That's yeah, so true. In life in general, right? And if you apply that to your business, wow.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
You know, watch it grow. So what do you think the biggest social thing that we still have to deal with, or the biggest social wisdom that you can share is?
The biggest social wisdom. Let me think a minute. I think I will kind of fall back on something that I referenced earlier, and that is that, and you know, I recently joined the Atlanta Botanical Gardens as a member. And, you know, I've spent some time at the Botanical Gardens just observing the diversity in creation.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's like, I remember going through the planetarium and just all the different species that are present within the Botanical Gardens. And this doesn't represent everything, right? And I was there one day recently, and I thought, oh my God, people come to pay to see this diversity, right? When are we as human beings going to recognize the diversity in the human experience relative to just this one aspect of diversity in creation? And it's like, wow. It was like a lesson learned for me. It's like, please allow the scales to fall from my eyes and to see the diversity and the complexity in everyone around me, and to embrace them for the beauty and the uniquenesses that they bring.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. You know, I get a little bit of that. I live out in the Stone Mountain area, and there's, you know, the mountain. I'm about 3 miles from there, and I go usually 2 to 3 days a week, and I walk a few miles. And lately, because we're coming into the fall as we record this, the deer are a lot more active.
Right.
And so I'm always amazed. I grew up on a 75-acre farm, right? But I'm always amazed when I see deer out at Stone Mountain Park. I'm like, we're in the middle of a city with, I don't know, 5-6 million people, whatever. And there are deer everywhere, and there's plants and trees and just the beauty of it. And sometimes I'm just overtaken by that. And so it's kind of the same thing that you just said, right? But you put it in such an eloquent way about the diversity piece. It's like, yeah, wow. And it's so, you know, we get it, and I do this when I'm walking, right? The other day I'm walking and I'm doing the whole, oh, this is hard and sweating, and when am I going to be done? And I look up, and there's a deer standing on the sidewalk, literally in front of me. Right. And it hit me, you know, maybe you need to get out of like your own place and keep your eyes forward, right? And look and see what's in the journey, instead of being so focused on that, this is hard and I'm sweating it, you know, but that life, that in that moment of seeing that deer there, it was like, wake up.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you just said, because one of the most important lessons that I've learned in my personal life and my personal journey, specifically around my journey in transitioning, is, you know, it's not about the destination. It's not just about the destination. It's as much about the journey, because how I show up today, how you show up in that moment, right? You could have missed the deer. Yeah. But because you embrace the moment, you experience this beauty, right? And this creature standing before you. And I've learned that, you know, rather than getting frustrated because I'm not reaching my destination, rather than getting frustrated about that, why don't I reframe that and focus on what can I do now, the next hour, the next day, to create a different experience for my destination, right?
Yeah.
So live in the now, live in the moment, and that's how I live my life now.
Yeah. And I love that everything that you've talked about and that we've talked about in the almost hour now that we've been talking, it all relates back to what you named your company, right?
Absolutely.
Transformational journey. I mean,
absolutely. And that was very intentional, Diane.
I'm sure it was.
Very intentional. Yeah.
Well, this has been amazing. Gabrielle, why don't you just any last words, and then let us know how we can get in touch with you, best ways to reach out and that sort of thing. Because I think not only for inside of our community, but I think there might be people who have jobs or whatever that, you know, want to put people in touch with you and
Right.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, I wanted to take a moment and thank you, Diane, because like we were talking about before we went live today, I really appreciate and respect that you are giving other people permission and showing other people how to move from an ally to an advocate. You know, allyship has been the buzzword in the spaces that I've lived in for the last few years. But I think now there's a calling, there's a need to move from allyship to advocacy. And you are doing that by raising the voices of those who have different personal experiences than your own, right? And you're highlighting the different intersections in the human experience. So kudos to you for doing that. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of that journey that you're in. So you can find me on all the social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can also find me at our website at www.transformationjourneysww.com. And if you need to get a hold of me, feel free to reach out to me. I'll support you in any way that I can. I'll offer resources to support you wherever you are in your journey of authenticity and vulnerability.
And I'm just going to say, when Gabrielle said, I don't know that I've ever met anybody who genuinely means it from their heart like you do. Like when she says reach out and, you know, she'll support you, that's 100% the case. So thank you, by the way, for the acknowledgement. And this, you know, this means a lot to me. Thank you for giving us your time today and for speaking just from your heart. I just, there's just, I don't know. I've said this to you since the moment that I heard you speak and that we met for the very first time. There's something about you. There's a special connection. And I know that you and I are going to be doing things for a long time to come. And I'm just honored and just so grateful for your time and your insights and just everything that you gave us today, which fits perfectly into, you know, where I'm taking Queer Prophets and specifically Queer Prophets podcast. You guys share this message. I'd love to hear your comments. Reach out to Gabrielle. If you have topics that you want to hear us talk about, please, you know, make those comments and do that. Share this, because I think not only do we need this inside of our community, but the world at large needs to hear some of the things that we've talked about in this particular interview, in this particular episode of Queer Prophets podcast. Again, I'm Diane Conklin. Remember the three pillars, and that's what we're all about here: inclusion, community, and growth. Until next time, Gabrielle, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane.